Welcome everybody to another episode of the Dragonus Podcastus. My name is Dead Ponic, as always. Her name is Queen Byron, as always, unless she's changed it on me.
Nope, not this week.
Okay, good. Anyway, if you guys enjoy our stuff, you can support us at patreon.com/Dragonus Podcastus. Okay, so movie time. What are we? We're covering the D&D movie.
We
I will.
absolutely
I will.
are.
I will let Byron basically explain how we're gonna do this.
Yeah, so we've both seen the movie. We're going to start with kind of a generic, spoiler-free review, stuff that you'd see in any trailer or any other news article. It wasn't story or plot specific. And then we'll give a fair warning to everyone. Turn away now if you want to avoid spoilers or if you haven't seen the movie yet. And then we'll give a little bit more in-depth, talk more specifics of certain scenes, characters, moments, or things like that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with the non-spoiler territory. So overall, what would you would how is the movie? How would you say the movie is? Would you recommend the movie to D&D fans?
I would. I can see where they were trying to kind of toe a line or walk kind of between two groups, right? They want people who like to play D&D and are familiar to enjoy the movie, but I think they're also trying to bring in new people. So as far as references and lore and things like that, if you are into D&D, you'll get some of those things, and if you're not, those words are mostly meaningless, but I think if you enjoy fantasy adventure movies, you will like it.
Wow, the alternative is watching the other D&D movies, so there's not much say there.
Well, yeah, I think there's been some movies in the last 20 years or so that were good fantasy adventures, not necessarily with D&D lore. This one has D&D lore.
Yeah. The other weird thing, which is strange. One thing about it is that Chris Pratt is well,
Chris Pine.
Chris Pine. Sorry, Chris Pine is on point as the main character.
They did a good job, I think.
I think so. I think the actors that play their respective characters did a really good job. Like,
I thought everyone was very believable.
oh yes, very, in terms of like there was some really good like special effects. There were definitely there was a good combination of CG and practical effects. I particularly I really like that because with I was expecting like a CG fest, but there was a great deal of combination, which is what this movie needed. It needed that being
Yeah.
said, said though, no spoilers again until a little bit later, but I kind of wish there were more classes. They had brought in a couple more classes. Um, the other thing I really liked was there was definitely in terms of like how it's represented of the universe and just in general, the magic is really well done. That
Absolutely.
that was the best thing about the movie was the magic was very well represented. There were
Yeah.
there were definitely moments where like, oh yeah, I know that spell, and it's
Exactly.
exactly yeah. It's like wow, they did a really good job with that.
Yeah, there were several times where I was like, I know what spell they just cast. I can tell because they represented it so well on screen, and they don't even like. It wasn't like super on the nose or whatever. Where they're like announcing them like like in anime or Yu-Gi-Oh or something like that. But you could tell based on what was happening on screen. But at the same time, I think if you're not familiar with 5th edition rules or spells or lore, it looked cool regardless. Whether you could tell kind of what was cast or not, it looked cool.
Okay. What about the comedy? Because the comedy was on point. It was dark when it needed to be. It was funny when it needed to be. But
Yeah.
Overall, I'd say they did a good job with the comedy. It was very well put together. Um,
My my only criticism of the comedy is just that in the one of the first scenes, they're in a prison, and it seemed like they were kind of making like a prison joke a little bit, which I'm not a huge fan of those kinds of things, but um, I guess trigger warning for people if that bothers you. But otherwise, I thought all the jokes were really good, and there weren't any other problematic ones in my view.
okay, let's talk about the other actors, like Michelle Rodriguez. I was not expecting. Bradley Cooper, that was a big surprise for me.
I love the ensemble cast. I thought they did a great job. It really did feel like they brought a party of adventurers together.
Yeah, I appreciate what they did. I mean,
Hmm.
they could have gone they could have gone like big name celebrities, but they decided, hey, let's get like some relatively unknowns
Hmm.
and get a good script together. I think the writing was also the strongest point because of the because of how it was set up. And
Hmm.
there was a lot of other references that I was like, holy crap, there was a reference to like a bunch of different cities. There was
Hmm.
at the midpoint there was a they referenced something. What did you think about the different monsters?
Yeah, I thought it was really cool to see some of those different creatures, and we're not going to talk specifics till a little bit later, but I thought for the most part the monsters in the movie were also really well represented, and it was fun to see them on screen.
Yeah, I was a little bit shocked by what I saw, but you also mentioned like last week the 90s cartoon. There was a reference there.
The
Uh
80s.
oh,
Hmm.
80s, sorry.
Yep.
Now they don't get they don't get a lot of screen time, but it's nice that they're there. Um what did you think of the two villains? Well, depending on which villain you were talking about here, cuz um
It
what
well, again, I thought it was really interesting. If you're familiar with lore, Forgotten Realms lore, and things like that, you kind of clue into it pretty quickly. Otherwise, I think it was a nice reveal when they eventually get to that. I'm trying not to spoil anything.
yeah, I actually I mean the quest was basically centered around a person rather than like stealing the treasure. I actually there was a part that I was really surprised about with and then when we get to the territory, I'll explain it a little bit better. But I was like, "Oh my god, why didn't I think of that? Escaping that? It's like, wow, okay." Also, I didn't know that a certain character had a previous relationship with another character, and that kind of created tension. And also, um, oh, speaking of the magic, I think they did attunement. Like that was an interesting representation of attunement.
Mm, it was a little bit different. I think one thing that I have been kind of seeing and also saying myself about the movie is that if you watch the movie knowing about the rules, knowing about lore and things like that, more specifically I think the rules, just remember, DM rule is first, right? The DM rule of cool, DM fiat, things like that. So, if you're familiar with the rules, go into the movie knowing that not every rule is represented 100% rules as written. But again, that's kind of up to each DM. And so I've seen questions on, oh, how would you do that in your game? Or blah, like the owlbear wild shape was a really common kind of a controversy that we were seeing before the movie came out. And I would just explain it away kind of as, well, that's up to that DM. If that DM allows it at their table, that's great. I don't allow that at my table. I stick with rules as written for the wild shape lists. But I think that that's kind of a good umbrella to keep the movie under, is that DM or the writers in this case were kind of using rule of cool, DM fiat kind of stuff where they get to decide, where they bend the rules a little bit. And every DM has that power, don't forget. You can always change things if you don't like them. But there weren't 100% rules as written in the movie.
Yeah, as I've always said, the the rule book is more guidelines than, well,
Mhm.
not actual rules, but they're kind of guidelines, and you don't have to
Mhm.
follow them to the letter. I think the
Mhm.
director was a I think the director was definitely the DM here, and I appreciate what they did. I also like the production design and the different settings. The settings were my favorite part also because they were really fun. Okay,
Mhm.
do you want to move over into spoiler
Let
territory?
look. I would give a couple of criticisms real quick, just before we go into the spoilers. Just that, again, we've seen these conversations online and in some of my friends and stuff. Rules are written, blah blah blah. Those kinds of things. Just remember that it was fantasy adventure movie. They wanted to tell a story on screen, and they didn't keep it rules as written, which is totally fine. Um, there were a couple of scenes that were a little bit slow, I thought, but overall they were okay. And then the last thing I would kind of say on the criticisms is that while they did use quite a few practical effects, at some points they used CGI and they just didn't mix super well, in my opinion. So just go in knowing that it's going to be a fun fantasy adventure movie, and hopefully you'll enjoy it under that premise.
Okay, so are we gonna move in
Yeah.
spoiler territory now?
Yeah, so turn back, adventurer. If you haven't seen the movie or if you wish to remain unspoiled, we are going to talk specifics. This
Okay,
is the spoiler portion of this review.
yes. Okay, so now spoilers. So this is where I have quite a lot to say here. Um, my favorite joke of the movie, the potatoes.
That
The
was great.
potato being used to defuse the hostage situation, that was really fun. That was funny as hell, and especially since they do it in slow motion, it's great. Um,
That's such an amazing backstory kind of a thing, like character quirk. Those are the kinds of things that you want to put in your characters. When you're playing RPGs, like what makes them special? Well, Michelle Rodriguez's character was obsessed with potatoes. That's what makes her special.
yeah, I like the beginning scene where they basically tell the backstory of how, well, Chris
Hmm.
Pine's character got into this prison, and then when they escape, but the council's like, "We approved your pardon."
Poor timing.
Yeah. What was it? What did they use to escape? What was that flying creature again?
It
They
was
used.
an Aarakocra.
Yeah,
One of the members of the council was an Aarakocra.
I think I also saw during the walk through the prison. I saw Yuan T in there. I think.
That's totally possible. These are races that you can play in 5th edition.
The guy they were moving in, was he an orc?
I don't recall. But
My
I think they showed a really good diverse mix of different peoples and different humanoids.
yeah, I my other favorite thing was definitely the references to the other stuff like Baldur's Gate,
Mhm.
Neverwinter, Waterdeep. Uh,
Yep. Forgotten Realms. They showed the prison was in Icewind Dale, and when they zoomed out and they showed the map on screen, kind of as you were kind of like traveling, air quotes. They showed Icewind Dale, and the spine of the world was written on the map. You could see those, and they zoomed out. They showed the whole kind of the main section of the Forgotten Realms, which has like the desert, the Sword Coast, and like you said, all those cities that they mentioned.
my biggest thing was I did not realize that Chris Pine's character was a harper. And then I realized, oh, so the Harpers are like, they're basically, they follow the Paladin creed, Paladin oaths, but they're not technically Paladins then?
They have kind of their own kind of oath against tyranny and oppression and things like that. So that was something that was really interesting to me because when you play 5th edition, if you play in Adventures League, which is like organized play at game stores and conventions typically, these factions come into play a lot. Zentarum, the Harpers, the rest of them, I don't, Emerald Enclave. But if you play Homebrew or if you play any of the other basically adventure modules, they never come up. They never come up. They're basically only an Adventurers League thing. So that was really interesting to me to see them represented on screen because, I mean, you either hear about them a lot or none at all. So it kind of makes me think that the adventure, and the movie was kind of related more a little bit to Adventures League, which makes sense. They want people to play in their organized play system, rather than kind of like a homebrew game. But then at the same time, they had so many, rule of cool moments that you would never be able to do in an Adventures League game, unfortunately.
When they mentioned the Underdark, I was drinking a little bit of tea in the theater, and I almost spit out my tea, and I was like, "Wait, what? The Underdark?"
Yeah. Do we have time to go all the way through the Underdark and come back in this movie? But apparently we do.
Yeah, it's like, and apparently the Paladin hid the big the MacGuffin in the Underdark because apparently that's the last place anybody would want to go. Also, I love the representation of the Paladin, like his oaths. His magic is a lot more subtle though, cause it's not definitely my favorite character is definitely the Druid. I love her. I love her. Like, she's a tiefling. It's like, wow.
With a tail. She had a tail.
I know, and they actually use like all of like her stuff. What I
really liked about the tiefling specifically too, and the druid, is that they made that. I think people are going to cosplay as these characters in the future, or they're going to base their own D&D characters around them. And the tiefling especially, I thought, was really well done and practical. You could recreate her costume with things on Amazon or a local costume shop or like a thrift store. Like, you can get a wig and put horns on it. I know I've done it with my friends. So I thought all of the characters were really well done in a way that could also be replicated. That's kind of something that I look at when I watch fantasy and sci-fi movies. Can this costume be replicated by basically anyone? I thought they did a great job in that area.
I think Michelle Rodriguez was definitely a highlight because now, this is gonna be a misconception, but is she a fighter or is she a barbarian?
Yeah, they didn't always use those class terms. So I don't think, like, even Chris Pine's character, I don't think they called him a bard in the movie at all. And actually, he never cast any spells, which would be a big bard class feature, right? I mean, it does appear like he gave inspiration. He attacked people from behind, but he never attacked anyone directly, and he didn't carry a weapon. So with Michelle Rodriguez's character, I mean, it's 50-50 almost. If she was a bard, or sorry, if she was a fighter or barbarian, I could see him going either way. But again, I think it kind of goes back to that DM rule of cool. What looks good on screen, what sounds cool, and again, if you're playing a character like that, you don't necessarily have to play a barbarian who gets super angry and like hulks out. And you can play a fighter who gets upset too, So there's lots of ways to interpret both of those things.
I also really like that Holga is the Michelle Rodriguez's character. She actually she has a connection to Chris Pine's daughter, who is basically the entire reason that is the big motivation behind this.
Yeah.
Which is, I think that was really good. Okay, let's talk about like the monsters. Okay, we had a displacer beast, which holy crap! Like, I did not know.
Great.
I did not know the displacer beast could actually like make a copy of itself. So that was a big shock for me. You had the mimic. The mimic was definitely something
that was great.
That was great. Yeah. You had the intellect devours.
In the Underdark.
Literally just walking brains. It was really cool. And then you had the dragon, because you can't have a Dungeons & Dragons movie without a dragon. And I was expecting like a big fight maybe with the dragon, but it turns out it's just a fat dragon, and they do make a fat joke. Like, doesn't he say like, what did you devour the last cave?
Yeah, it was a chunky boy.
Yeah. And the way they get out of that situation is pretty creative too. Like,
absolutely.
It's a creative, and the way they defeat the villain is creative too, because they set up the magic suppression cufflink, and then they pay it off. Okay, gelatinous cube. I was not expecting gelatinous cube.
I loved it. I thought that was great, and I thought it was super creative too when they used it to escape the shifting labyrinth.
Yeah, the druid, she actually like turns into a snake, so she can actually escape out of the
Yeah.
cube before it actually devours her. And it's like, why didn't I think of that? It's like,
Yep.
and that
That was brilliant.
yeah,
Big brain.
that was brilliant. Okay, Forge, I'm gonna call him the Snake. I liked him quite a bit.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I thought it was a well represented, you know, bad guy.
Yeah, but the real bad guy is the Red Wizard. Now the Red Wizards, their big plan to unleash, what was it called, the Bewildering Death? What's it called?
I don't remember all the details of their plan, but yeah, I was a bit surprised to see that character had been working with the Red Wizard and the Red Wizards in general, but I guess it kind of went into his backstory or fit his motivations.
Yeah, and also that the fact the Paladin actually has a tie to the villain. Like, what was that mark on his head? I've seen that before, but I don't recognize it.
On the wizard?
No, on the Paladin. When he's running away from the red mist, he gets like a mark on his head.
Oh, right. They showed it appearing. I think it was kind of like Mark of the Paladin. That's not a Paladin like specific thing. I think it was kind of more meant to show like he had, you know, not an awakening, but like that's kind of like when he got his gifts from the start. That was kind of like his backstory. Um, and what it's not a regular Paladin class feature, but perhaps it was something, again, he worked it out with his DM to work it into his backstory. That was like the moment he knew what he wanted to do, as a career.
Also, I like his fight scene with the undead assassins. Okay,
Hmm.
not gonna lie, they
Oh,
did. Yeah,
yeah. So that was another critique of mine, though. They until up until the final battle, all the fight scenes were one party member versus all the rest of the bad guys, which is unrealistic on many levels. Not the least of which is that if your party member is in a fight, you are going to want to help them. Like, I've never been in a D&D party where everyone else sat back and let one person like take all the hits or do all the hits. Like everyone wants to be involved in the combat, whether it makes sense or not. People want to fight. They want to use their class abilities. They want to get in there, but also just kind of like, going back a little bit to mechanics and rules a bit with action economy and the way that 5th edition is set up. Like, not even Michelle Rodriguez's character could take on like 6 guards even if they were all like commoners, right? She wouldn't live through that. That wasn't really realistic. So I didn't love the fight scenes because like all of them were basically just one person doing all the work and everyone else watching, or maybe Chris Pine hit somebody in the back of the head with his loot, or what have you. It wasn't until the end when they were fighting the Red Wizard that everyone got in on the same combat. That was unrealistic.
yeah. My big okay. Here's a couple of critiques. So I'm gonna take a wild guess and say this Red Wizard is a level 20. So how was she able to detect that
Yeah.
the wild shape was like right there? There's just
So, yeah, so I would say, first of all, don't give your bad guys player levels because it causes problems, right?
yeah.
But like you said, actually, wild shape is not something that you can detect with magic, I don't think, because it's more of a magical ability than a spell. Maybe she has some other ability, and maybe, again, we kind of go back to DM rule of cool kind of a thing. Maybe in their campaign you can detect magic and wild shapes with a spell or
Unless
with a class ability.
she was using a detect magic spell. I mean,
Well, as far as I understand, even detect magic doesn't necessarily detect wild shapes because detect magic is more for magic spells that have been cast, spells specifically, and wild shape is not a spell.
ah, okay.
Hmm.
Okay, so my other one is, so I'm guessing that the sorcerer is a level 10, and how the hell is he able to go up against this red wizard? Now I understand that he went through his little arc of he has to go through the attunement, and it turns out
Hmm.
that it was really just he had to get over his own self-doubt in order to use his attunement, which
Hmm.
I think is really good. That was an interesting idea for attunement, but there is no way in hell, because I'm guessing that he was at least level 10 minimum, and as you said, giving your bad guy a player level 8 is gonna cause problems. But there's no way in hell he was if the sorcerer is a level 10 and the red wizard is a level 20, there's no way in hell they're gonna be able to. The sorcerer's gonna come out of that unless he had the help of his party,
Mhm.
which kind of plays into the idea. Now, um, what was he yeah. Oh, during the escape scene. I'm gonna take a wild guess, and it's because of action economy and basically they're going by rounds. And now of course this is movie logic. So the druid shapeshifts at least 3 times during her escape when she's doing the little reconnaissance.
Mm.
Um I'm not sure how that like I'm not even sure if you can even do that. Like again,
Right.
again, it's movie logic, and she may have discussed it with the DM kind of thing. But it's not a big issue. It's just something I happen to notice. Also, I like what they did with um, like how they like find out about the helm. Like they basically that part of the movie where they're talking with the undead corpses.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
it was great. You have to ask him 5 questions, and then Chris Pine asks like 5 questions, and you kind of waste it, and then he goes back. It's
Yep.
it's
That's about it.
that was that was pretty good. I like that. Was there was another there was a lot the way they defeat the red wizard is basically they set up the um magic suppression cufflink, and so
Mhm.
earlier in the movie, like at the very beginning, um, Chris Pine's daughter actually has like a little pendant that basically is like an invisibility spell. It's and so basically she's able to slip in and put that on. Now they used the time stop spell like twice in the movie. One at the beginning and one at the end. I think
Yep.
that's the representation of the time stop spell was really well done. What else?
Yeah. Again, it was really interesting to see some of the magic spells cast, like um, like when they were talking to the corpses. They did, and then they did like green flame blade, and they did, um, you know, prestidigitation, and they did, like you said, time stop, and all these were really interesting.
Also, the shields are like the shield spells are really cool too. I think that
Hmm.
was really well done. Um, in terms of like the different monsters that the monsters were really well put together. There was definitely it's not a confusing plot, thank goodness, because if it was a confusing plot, like I would have lost interest like right away.
Uh
I
huh.
think I think another thing is that Chris Pine's character basically goes through his own arc where he's like he actually feels guilty about what he did because it
Hmm.
turns out that he's tried to steal the Red Wizard's treasure. It turns out the Red Wizards marked their treasure, and that's how they were able to find his home and kill his wife.
Yeah. Hmm.
Also, I understand. I think the idea of him letting go of his past and like letting go of the fact that his wife is gone, he's been trying to make up for that, and using the big MacGuffin to bring back Michelle Rodriguez. Like I was not expecting her to take the red wizard blade, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh my god, oh no! It's like I really like this character, and I was really sad to see her go, and then they said okay,
Yeah.
and then
It
they
was.
said yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, yeah, it was sad to see her go, and then they were holding the item, and I was tearing up a bit, and I could hear somebody in the theater where I was who was really crying. Like it was a very emotional moment. So overall, I think that the movie was a great representation of how a campaign can feel, where you have jokes, you have inside jokes, you have levity, you have funny moments, and you have like shared backstory sometimes. You have a common enemy, a common goal. The players just want the treasure, but you also have sad moments, like if your character was actually stabbed and you'd been with them for that many years in the movie. Um, Chris and Michelle's characters had been adventuring together for a really long time, like almost 10 years or something like that. And yeah, it was sad. People were crying, and I think Chris Pine's character made the right choice when he used the item on her.
Yeah. Oh, my other favorite joke of the movie is when, like, I don't. I thought Chris Pine doing his like singing his songs was really funny.
Mhm.
He can do a good job singing, but they use like a hologram to distract the guards, and then the sorcerer like my foot is stuck, and then all this weird stuff happens. It's like, okay, yeah, you got me.
Mhm.
You made me laugh. Um,
That was pretty funny.
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, one little thing that happened to me when I was watching the movie was during one of the quiet moments. Somebody let one go, and it echoed through the
Oh
entire
no.
yeah, and everybody just was laughing because they thought it was from the movie, but it was somebody in the theater watching it. It
Well, that's
was
too bad.
great. I
But
couldn't. Yeah, I
yeah, overall, I really liked it. I thought, it's a little sad that Jeremy Irons wasn't in it. I would have loved to have seen just like a cameo, just as a joke. The other thing that I would have loved to have seen, but I know why they didn't do it, I would have loved to see some meta jokes. Like, they meet an NPC at a stall, and he's wearing a hat, he's got a mustache or whatever, and they go to the next stall, and it's the same guy, but he's wearing a different hat. You know what I mean? Like how it kind of works when you have a DM who's running 100 different characters and everyone on the other 5 people are playing just one character, right? Or if what character died and then the next second their brother shows up to avenge, things, funny things like that. But I know why they didn't do that, because they wanted to make it accessible for people who haven't played Dungeons and Dragons to enjoy a fantasy adventure and to hopefully get in to the tabletop hobby. Um, the only other thing that makes me a little bit sad is that my dad is the reason that I play Dungeons and Dragons. He was, really into it in the 70s and the 80s, and he taught me while we were growing up and things like that. He passed away in 2021. I would have loved to have seen the movie with him and had this kind of same discussion and talk about all the rules they got wrong and all the things that they messed up and all the things that he would have loved. So it's a little sad for me in a small way, but overall, I think it was a great movie.
yeah. Yeah, I think my dad would have wanted to see it too because
Yeah.
he was a big D&D buff. I think the ending was pretty funny too because it's basically Forge trying to escape the same way that um Chris Pine and Michelle Rodriguez escaped, except they used the portal uh, item to basically
Mhm.
stop him from doing that. And I'm like, yep, I knew something they were gonna do something. They were gonna either patch that hole up or they were gonna pay that off. And
Mhm.
that magical item that's basically just a portal gun. Or
Uh huh.
uh, yeah. I don't have a problem with that. I thought that was really creative. Like the way they
Yeah.
got the people away from the giant mist was they basically said, okay, how far can that spell go? And they're like, he says about quarter of a mile, I think he said.
Mhm.
Why? And then he says because he made a oath to with the paladin, so he wasn't gonna take all the treasure for himself. He was actually gonna give it back to the people. He was kind of
And
reluctant about
he
it.
did.
So he basically takes all the treasure and he basically dumps it out and throws it at
Yeah.
gets the
That was
people.
great.
So they run away from the red mist.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I like I think that was really creative. Like there were some really creative ways they went around like the typical fantasy movie. Um,
Mhm.
my I thought it was really cool. Oh yeah, owlbear. Okay, owlbear. So the druid comes in, morphs into the owlbear, grabs the red wizard, and does basically like a Hulk smash Loki thing. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I think he got him, and then he does it more times. It's like everybody laughs at that. I wish it.
Yeah, I did love that scene. It felt a little forced, and yeah, it definitely felt like a reference to the MCU and not just like its own battle. But yeah, people in the theater where I was were laughing kind of at that moment.
What would have sold the scene probably was when she comes out of her shapeshifting. She could have said "puny god," and that would have just been
Hmm.
that would have been a good reference. But then again, you are referencing the MCU, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But 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 they didn't do the exact way of like when Hulk smashes Loki. Like she basically just slams him against the ground, not like grabs him by the leg and just smashes him a bunch of times. Not gonna lie, I like the owl bear because you could do so many cool things. Um,
Mhm.
I like the fact that the sorcerer starts out like he's not confident and he's doing like a bunch of like he like did they make a joke about like how like oh maybe you can throw like the smell of grass at the red wizard
Yeah.
like
Yeah, so this is really interesting because I think that the sorcerer character is kind of a representation if you play a character suboptimally, like so for a sorcerer their spell casting ability is charisma, but he seemed to have a medium charisma. It wasn't even very high, which kind of plays into his self-doubt. The spell casting didn't always go. That was I thought they showed the wild magic surges epic. That was the best way to do it. And then with the attunement, he was in his own head too much. Again, it kind of plays into his charisma was kind of like maybe not his best stat, which is a way to play your character if you have a sorcerer with a low charisma, or maybe play a cleric with low wisdom. Some people do choose to play that way as a roleplay challenge, as kind of a fun thing to do, different than a norm where you would take your spellcasting ability as your highest score, right?
yeah it's I thought that was yeah I think they did the sorcerer class justice and that was a really good
Mhm.
representation.
Mhm.
The druid they did a really good job, especially I love the paladin representation. I love now the
Mhm.
bard. I wish he had cast a spell, but I understand that there's other ways to be a bard, not just through magic. Like you can be like inspirational and all that. It's an interesting
Well,
idea.
mhm. Yeah, I see. I've seen some conversation online where they were kind of saying they wanted the sorcerer to be the main spellcaster and kind of have that role in the party. And if you're not familiar with D&D, then you'd think a bard does music, right? That's absolutely what Chris Pine's character did. However, in 5th edition, you have spell casting slots, you have spells, and if you're not casting spells, you are really playing suboptimally. I mean, like, you're doing yourself and your party a big disservice because those are your resources. Bards aren't super great at hitting. They're not super great at range attacks. Inspiration, you can use your proficiency bonus times per day, I think, or maybe your charisma ability times per day. It's not a ton. So I can see why they chose that, again, with the, you know, catering a bit more to people who aren't familiar with 5th edition. But yeah, I would have loved to have seen him cast a spell. Um, Vicious Mockery is a wonderful, wonderful cantrip that bards get, where basically you insult someone so bad it hurts. And they could have absolutely done that, but they chose not to.
And well, since we're and I think they did a good representation of the fighter barbarian, either or. So
Yeah.
I think it was really interesting. It was a really fun. It's a fun movie, and
Hmm.
I would definitely recommend it for D&D players. I would definitely recommend it for anybody who's not familiar with D&D,
Yeah.
or even just newbies who have like no idea how it works. This is a good introductory medium. Um,
Absolutely. So with that said, if I may, if you are listening to this podcast and you're wondering how do I get started playing D&D, go to adventureunbounded.com, where we have a team of dungeon masters who are well trained introducing the rules and creating characters with new players. Even if you're familiar, if you're looking for a regular weekly game that will run every week, no questions asked, visit adventureunbounded.com and sign up with us today.
and one of them is a red wizard who's gonna kill you and turn you into an undead.
That's a secret for later.
Sorry. Anyway, okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give the movie a 9 out of 10. Most
Oh,
definitely.
wow.
I have nothing but high praise for this movie. It is a really good movie. It is a lot of fun.
Hmm.
I think it may be the best D&D movie I've ever seen out of the ones I've seen. Um, even for somebody like me who's seen like most of the D&D stuff except for the 80s cartoon, I would say this is better than the Dungeons and Dragons Wrath of the Dragon God movie. Like that
Mm.
movie is good, but it's kind of bland a little bit. But this, I was never bored. I was glued to the screen. And
Hmm.
that's a good thing to have. Like, and I'm invested in the characters. I'm invested in the stakes. Even if it is a little weird that they're basically using a giant artifact to create basically a giant red mist to
Mm.
basically that kills everybody. um, yeah, there's that, and then they turn him into undead, which is like
Yes.
okay, that's reasonable. It's I also like how like they figure out like how the what the actual plot of the game is. So basically, Forge is just a big coward. He's a big snake, and he tries to flee while the Red Wizard is
Yeah.
concocting her plan, and well, yeah, and it
Yep.
ends up not paying off well for him. He basically gets caught by the Paladin, who comes back at the end.
Mhm.
What would
So
you rate the movie?
I would give it a solid 8. I really enjoyed it. I see some people saying that it was like a heist movie. I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that like 100%. I absolutely love heists. I watch tons of heist movies. I just watched Ant-Man with my family again the other day, which is a great heist movie, I think. Um, I don't know if I would necessarily call it a heist. I prefer to call it a fantasy adventure, as I have been. But I think it was a solid 8. It had, like we said, jokes. It had levity. It had serious moments. It had touching moments. You know, it had a lot of heart. And I think it was really a fantastic representation of how a campaign can feel, right? Where you're gathering around, you're getting your parties together, you got to go get the thing to get the thing, and then you go and do the thing with the thing. And then at the end you kill the bad guy, and then, you know, obviously there were triumphs and tribulations. I think overall, very good movie.
Yeah, I if you want a good if you want a good like heist movie, watch Heat. That is probably the
Ah,
it's a really fun movie. It's got Tom Sizemore, it's got Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. Definitely a good that's a good heist movie, but this movie, I
I have
say
to check it out.
it's a good it does have a good heist feel to it cuz
Mm.
I would say it's pretty good. Anyway, so next week is the 1 year anniversary of the Dragonus Podcastus. Yay! We are actually with
Mm.
our anniversary and we are going to be doing something super special. Stay tuned for that and we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.